Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Last night, the government suffered its first defeat on Brexit when the House of Lords voted by 102 majority, pretty big majority, in favour of an amendment to guarantee the rights of EU nationals living and working with their families here in the UK. As I say, it's quite a substantial loss. It's reflecting the fact that the government doesn't have a majority in the Lords, and it's led to speculation. Maybe, just maybe, it could embolden Tory rebels in the Commons when the legislation returns there. Joko has the details.
Yes, the proposed amendment requires the government to introduce proposals within 3 months of Article 50 to ensure EU citizens in the UK have the same resident rights after Brexit. It was passed last night in the House of Lords by a majority of 358 votes to 256. The government was quick to say it was disappointed in the result, arguing the bill should simply be about invoking Article 50 and beginning the formal process of withdrawal from the EU. Next Tuesday, the Lords will consider backing other possible amendments to the bill, including one calling for a meaningful vote in Parliament on the final deal. Then the amended bill will be sent back to the House of Commons, which can remove the changes before sending it back again to the Lords. This could result in what is commonly known as ping-pong between both houses until one side backs down. But Shadow Lords leader, Baroness Angela Smith, has insisted peers won't block the Brexit bill and she would not support extended ping-pong. So the bill is only likely to be delayed by a week, and Wednesday, the 15th of March, is provisionally pencilled in as the date for triggering Article 50 and the formal start of the Brexit process, still well ahead of Theresa May's deadline of the end of March. Andrew.
Thanks, Joko. We're joined now by the Conservative peer, former Chancellor Norman Lamont. Of course, Andrew Gwynn from the Labour Party is with us too. Norman Lamont, it's the job of the Lords to scrutinise legislation and to make amendments where it sees fit. So what's it done wrong?
Well, this bill had one purpose, to trigger Article 50. What the Lords is trying to do with a whole series of amendments that they have put down is to attack conditions to the triggering of Article 50. That doesn't seem to me to be scrutinising, and it seems to me it's against the national interest because it is taking away from the government, or would take away from the government, the flexibility that they ought to have.
Except that one of the consequences of leaving the EU is to raise the issue of the status of EU nationals who are already living and working in this country. And the Lords thinks it's right, therefore, to make an amendment to reassure them that things will be fine, that nothing will change. Since that's government policy, we are told anyway, why not accept the amendment?
Well, this issue of the status of EU nationals here cannot be separated from the situation of British citizens resident in other EU countries.
Why?
Because we need to get the interests of them safeguarded as well. And the Prime Minister, as I think you were alluding to, has made an attempt already before negotiations have started to get the issue of EU nationals here and of UK nationals, to whom the UK government has a responsibility and a duty of care, to get them considered together. And we were told this could not be done in advance of the negotiations.
No, but because Angela Merkel in particular, the German Chancellor, said, well, you have to trigger Article 50 first before we can do that as part of the negotiations. But are you under any fears that other EU countries are going to begin mass deportation of British citizens in EU countries?
There are no question of mass deportations, and there are certainly none in this country, and it was ridiculous. No, but last night people were referring to the Ugandan Asians, referring to the Edict of Nantes, referring to what happened.
Exactly, and I'm not going down that route because it seems to me that that's really not relevant here. So I ask again, why would we fear that in the end, particularly since we will have shown goodwill to those EU nationals that we have here, many of whom, most of whom are essential to our economy, that we wouldn't make that gesture and assume that the other EU countries are going to do the same?
Well, I don't think you can assume that.
Really? What evidence do you have
I
for
don't
that?
think you can. Well, Last night, someone made the point in the debate, I can't go into the detail because I don't know the detail of it myself, but there are certain countries in the EU that have not fully recognised what they're meant to under the EU treaties in terms of the rights of nationals living within their countries. I think it would be quite reckless to do a deal about EU nationals here and not have similar, absolutely identical assurances.
So why did so many Tory lords rebel and not accept the Home Secretary's assurances, the Conservative Home Secretary's assurances?
Well, I don't know how many Tories did vote. No doubt you've looked that up. I haven't.
Enough
myself.
to make the majority rather large for this amendment.
Yes, there were quite a lot of crossbenchers who voted with the Conservatives.
Your old colleagues in Cabinet as well.
Indeed, a rare appearance.
Oh, very well. Andrew Gwynn, will Labour back these changes in the Commons?
Absolutely. 3 million people woke up today having a sense of security that they've not had since the 23rd of June. These are people that have made their life here in the United Kingdom, that are contributing to the British economy and that are contributing to the Exchequer. And I think that we need to take away all the uncertainty at the start of this process as to what is going to happen to those EU citizens.
Very well, but we understand from the Labour leader of the Lords that if this amendment is defeated, despite the best efforts of Labour MPs, that when it goes back to the Lords, that's the end of the story.
Well, obviously, Article 50 is going to be triggered. Article 50 is the start of the process. We would like to get that certainty in right from the very start.
Right.
But of course, there will be other opportunities to secure these assurances for 3 million European Union citizens living in the United Kingdom through the Great Repeal Bill and through other legislation that will come forward as part of our removal from the EU.
But you've just said that it was important as they woke up this morning, the EU citizens living in this country, that they had some reassurance and how important that was to them. Now you're saying that after round one, you'll give in and they'll lose their reassurance.
Well, I would hope that we would secure a victory in the House of Commons on this, because actually what we don't want is to go into a situation of ping-pong. We want to move very quickly to the substantive arguments, and that only comes once Article 50 has been triggered. But I want to offer assurances to all EU citizens living and working here in the United Kingdom that they are welcome. They play...
Except that you're not, except that you're, the moment the Commons throws this back to the Lords, Labour peers are going to surrender.
I think because the House of Lords recognises that it would be foolish for the unelected chamber to be seen to be holding up the triggering of Article 50. That is not what the British people want.
What is your feeling, Norman Lamont, about Tory rebels in the Commons? Will they be emboldened by what has happened in the Lords? Will the government be able to take this out of the legislation again and send it back to the Lords?
I wouldn't have thought so, because if a potential rebel has supported the government in the previous vote, I'd have thought it would be very unlikely they would then change their mind just because of the House of Lords.
So in your view, despite this substantial majority, and we understand there's another defeat, we think, coming up in the Lords over the vote on the Brexit deal itself, in your view, is the government still on target for triggering Article 50 on March the 15th?
Provided that there is not an exercise in ping-pong. And the amendment that is being put forward next week would, I think, be a more serious amendment to be carried and would have a more disruptive effect on the process. So I think both of them are wrong, but I think it would be taken very badly if they carried the motion and then that actually became part of a condition for the negotiation.
But if you want, as the government does, Parliament to vote to begin the exit process from the EU, is it not perfectly reasonable for Parliament to insist, to enshrine in legislation, that when that deal, if and when that deal is done, you come back to Parliament for approval on the deal?
But the government have said there will be a parliamentary vote. That parliamentary vote will be on whether to accept any terms that have been agreed or whether to move to membership of the WTO and define the relationship in that way. What people are wanting with the amendment is to have a third option, which is to say we will effectively remain members of the EU, and that would be to go against the result of the referendum. By holding the referendum, we have bound ourselves to abide by the conclusion of that referendum.
Isn't Labour going along, though, here with something of a Hobson's choice? Because as I understand it at the moment, let's assume the deal is done. That's not a foregone conclusion, but let's assume a deal is done. It comes before Parliament in early 2019, after the 2-year process. The government says, all right, Parliament can vote on this, but the choice will be either to accept the deal or leave on probably worse terms of bare-boned World Trade Organization deals. So even if you're a Remainer, you're likely to vote for the deal rather than go out in WTO. Where's the choice?
Well, absolutely. And, you know, part of the argument that was put during the referendum that we wanted the British Parliament to be sovereign, that sometimes means that the British Parliament might make a decision that the government don't automatically like, and I would want there to be a meaningful choice at the end of this process.
But in the end, you're going to cave in on that as well, aren't you? You're going to, in the end up with a Hobson's choice in the early spring of 2019.
Well, let's see what happens in the House of Lords next week, and then let's see what happens in terms of the government's thinking beyond that.
OK. What are the chances of ping-pong? I mean, more extensive than the ping back to the Commons, than the pong back to the Lords, end of story. More than that or not?
I think it's unlikely.
All right. Norman Lamont, thank you for being with us.
I've been getting